Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and welcome to our series of author interviews. Today, I am here with Ana Viciana Suarez, and she is a fiction author or historical fiction author. And Ana, could you please explain exactly what it is that you write?
Well, I am actually a journalist by training, and that I think is
Mhm.
my main hat. And I've written other novels. This is my first historical fiction. And it's the story I imagined for Dulcinea, probably the most famous character in Spanish literature.
Aha. Oh, see, so could you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Sure. So I imagined her as being a woman named Dolça Lul Prat, which is a Barcelona woman, wealthy woman, who falls in love with an impoverished poet soldier named, you guess it, Miguel Cervantes. And theirs is a forbidden love because of the class difference, but it's something they work at, keep the relationship overcoming many obstacles until he renders her as the lowly Dulcinea in Don Quixote. And that really severs their connection. My book starts when she receives a deathbed note from Cervantes in 1616 requesting that she visit him or that they meet one last time. So she must travel the dangerous roads of Spain from Barcelona to Madrid, and on the way encounters bandits, the Spanish Inquisition, illness, all kinds of problems to get to him and to actually unburden herself of things she wants to tell him.
Okay. So, what was the inspiration behind this book? I mean, how did you decide about to do this book about these characters?
Well, it's this has been for decades. I first read Don Quixote in a Spanish 4 class as a 10th grader. And I should say I read it, I struggled through because of the old Spanish. And I always thought, who is this woman? Why is she exiled to the edges of this story? She's really in the shadows. And I said, one day I'm going to give her her own story and her own life. And 50 years later, it took me that long, I kept that promise to my 16-year-old self. So,
Uh-huh. And at that time, probably it was the time that Man of La Mancha was
yeah, it came a
popular.
little later. And I think, I grew up, and the canon I read was Cervantes, Quevedo, Becker, and stuff. Other people read Shakespeare and Chaucer and things. But I think when the musical came out with incredible music, I think that really opened the the story in its own way to kind of a broader audience. So who doesn't know how to sing, to dream an impossible dream? That's
Right.
such a classic.
Exactly. So, how much research did you have to do for this book?
Well, it was interesting because I'm familiar with Barcelona. My ancestral home is the Catalonia area. My mother was born in a village about an hour south of Barcelona. My dad's parents are from the area, and I visit it frequently. But of course, that's a big difference between this enormous popular uh, visiting Barcelona, where everybody thinks it's Barcelona Gaudi, and 1600
Right.
Barcelona, where the walls were still up. There were two walls surrounding, and many things. So I ended up probably over researching it, in the sense that I must have read at least 2 dozen books. Some of them, I read about 5 or 6 biographies of Cervantes. And that gave me kind of an understanding of the years he had been in Barcelona, what his life had been like. And then, of course, I had to research what exactly Barcelona was like.
Mhm.
Part of the problem I encountered were two, actually. One, a lot of the research was in Catalan, which is different from Spanish. So I can read Spanish perfectly. Catalan, my Catalan is very rudimentary. So I had to like struggle through some of it. Google Translate is okay sometimes, but sometimes it's hilariously funny. So sometimes I had to like text my cousins, "Hey, what does this say?" So there was some of that, but more importantly, I had applied for a grant and received to do research right about the time that COVID happened, and Spain closed a lot sooner than we did, and it took them a lot longer to reopen. And even when they reopened, I had issues. My family was saying, don't bother to come. You're not going to be able to go visit this or that or do anything. So I ended up doing almost all my research on the internet, which
Wow.
was a little difficult, but thank God for the internet, because there was all kinds of, I found diaries written during that time, again in Catalan. I found old maps of the city, because, of course, it's been rebuilt, and some streets name the street names of today aren't the same street names of
Hmm.
of 500 some years ago, and uh, even a lot of the things are just different. The markers and the landmarks are not the same.
Wow. So do you have a favorite research story in all of your writing?
Well, in all my writing, I have found, one of the things I discovered was I had never paid a lot of attention to, my ancestry. I'm Cuban American. I was born in Cuba, came here when I was young. Um, and I had visited, but I had not realized how much of the customs of my own household, my biological household that I had grown up in, were due to customs that had been going on in Catalonia for centuries. And I would discover, this food, and I knew exactly what this food was. For example, I knew what was done when you got married. There were certain customs, and to me, that was more of the recognition. Wow, that things can last across oceans, halfway around the world, and for centuries. And we take them for granted and never explore them. So for me, it was almost kind of like a rebirth of, wow, this is part of my heritage, and I've never paid attention to it. And then, to be honest with you, sometimes whenever I was in a book, Google has scanned some of these ancient books, And I would Google like my last name, and I found a Veciana, but it was not during this time. It was much further in the 1800s. So that to me was, oh, and he had been like a colonel or a general in one of the many wars fought. So that was interesting.
Wow. That would be very interesting looking at
Yeah.
your own family
Yeah, and you
history.
wonder because there apparently are a lot of Vecianas in the little village where, you know, my father's family comes from. Everybody, is Veciana is very common. It's very uncommon here. So in the US.
Hmm. Okay. So, what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Dulcinea?
To me, it was I because as I said, I'm a journalist by training. My first drafts were burdened, and that's the only way I can describe it, with all kinds of wonderful research that I said, I've got to put this in. This is so great. Um, and I quickly learned two things. When I brought a draft, I belonged to this writing group. Everybody said, oh my gosh, you know, you can't get past this. This might be interesting to you, but you're losing the story. And then also by the time, my agent got it, she basically said, you've got to cut 30,000 words.
Wow.
It was about 120,000. So that was probably the most challenging. I'm used to being edited. I'm used to cutting down, because that's how journalism, you have, not so much now in the internet era, but you still have to write to count. But that was that was quite the challenge. I had um, index cards and all kinds all over the floors. I wouldn't let anybody in my office because it was here. I had to move, compress, and then if I lost something, I had to pick up that thread if I moved something. So that to me was really the most the most challenging than anything, because I had a very clear idea of the characters, and I knew where the story ended. So it was just a matter of getting there, and I knew the scenes more or less. I don't always stick to my outline, but more or less I knew it. And but that the cutting was painful. you know,
Okay.
it was really
Yes.
painful.
So, did you outline the story ahead of time, or did you kind of let things go along, or are you a pantser?
I'm very much an outliner, but I've realized when I hear other writers, or I have friends who are writers that will do like a 50-page outline before they sit. I'm not that type of outliner. I know I'll do like what I call a more general outline. So I know that this event has to happen at this point in the narrative. This event has to do that, and then build from there towards the ending. I know the scenes that will take me to the ending. And then from there, I start dividing between the chapters and the scenes, and then go to a scene level. With Dulcinea, because it's a type of dual timeline, so it's the timeline of her journey, which I very much wanted to pattern it after the actual journey of Don Quixote, who travels through these dangerous roads of Spain. And then the other timeline is her remembering the the meeting and the love affair. and her life, really, and the choices she makes during this life uh, with Miguel Cervantes. So I really needed a road or two roads, two paths to see how I was going to get there because one had to lead to the other. So, but the book I'm working on now, I operate the same thing. It doesn't always follow because then something will pop in as I'm writing. I'm thinking, oh, I'm headed over there. Let's go there. And yeah, I go off. So it's not always. So I tend to overwrite and then start whittling down to
So
a
that kind of led,
sizable.
okay, that kind of led me into my next question is, what can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I got very interested in the research where I kind of went into all these rabbit holes of research. Um, Later on in the 1600s, Catalonia goes into a war that tries to secede from Spain. It's not the first time. They have other wars. I try to explain to people, think of the Catalans and the Basques as the Scots of England. So, kind of this secession and so on. So became very interested in these 1640s in this particular war because I happened to read a thesis while I was doing the research for the other for Dulcinea that it was the first time that pamphlets and what they considered modern journalism played a role in war. They had a lot of pamphlets, they had a lot of leaflets handed out, they covered the war. And I thought, as a journalist, wow, I didn't know this. And I just kept reading and reading and reading.
Mhm.
So I just became interested and said, I think this will be the next setting. It's almost an excuse for the research.
So this will be a fiction, a
So
historical
it'll be,
fiction.
yes, it'll be another historical novel.
Ah, excellent. Okay. I have some questions now about you being a writer. What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
I always like the idea. I like the beginning and the end of the process. So I like the idea because when I'm considering an idea, whether whatever form it may take, whether it's a magazine piece or a shorter form or a long form novel, there's this excitement. And then all I think about is this idea and everything that comes to me. I'll read a sign and something will pop in my head and I'm taking notes and I'm saving and it's so exciting you know, and it's wow. And then the end is when you're finished because the in between is so hard. It is so hard and you need such tenacity and such willpower to sit down and it doesn't get easier, you know it just doesn't. And so I have to remember the excitement and I have to remember how good it feels in in between. And I think to be a successful writer, yes, you have to have talent and you have to have skill, but I think the most important is having the persistence and the discipline, the self-discipline of doing it. For me, it's a job. I sit at my desk at a certain time. I work until a certain time, and some days are good and some days are bad, and just like any other job.
Hmm. So that kind of leads me into what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Um, I think there would be two things that have served me in good stead. Is one is read and read and read, and when you're reading, deconstruct what you're reading. I was not trained as a creative writer. As I said, in journalism, newspaper journalism in particular, which is where I spend 40 plus years, and writing fiction are very different. So when you are a good and careful reader, you learn from other writers. You learn how they construct not just a sentence, but a scene, a chapter, and then the whole plotting. And I have found that very helpful. Um, the second thing is there's so much rejection in 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 writing. Even when you're successful, there's rejection. And I think that persistence in a belief against all odds is important, because I think, or I should say, I know writers who I've always thought had great talent, friends of mine, and they did not persist. They did not buck the rejection. And the only difference is I did. I was like a pit bull with a bone. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it go. And I was going to do this and I was going to do this. And especially, I began writing in Spanish because that was my first language. And then coming back to the US as a junior, I had to veer into English. That involved, and I knew I wanted to be a writer, its own learning process and its own learning curve. And I think it was just a matter of persistence.
Okay. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career? If it's any different than the
I
advice
think
that you give.
I'm always surprised by how much readers remember what you write.
Interesting.
And part of it is, um, I do a weekly syndicated column. So I hear from readers relatively immediately. They email back when there was snail mail, they would write and stuff. And I would be surprised, even when I would speak in groups, people would remember things I had written about, subject matter, entire sentences that I could not remember, because as a journalist, you're constantly producing. You have to produce, and you have deadline. And then, but even with my fiction writing, I've had uh, a lot of mail of people telling me, oh, how much this meant um, to them, because they had experienced something similar, that had spoken to them. And that has that has really brought a lesson about how important the pen and how powerful the pen is in society and in our lives.
Interesting. So, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome it?
Part of it, um, to me at least, sometimes I think, why am I doing this? I question myself. And I think it's become, you know, more so because um, all my friends are either retired or about to be retired. So we're at that age. I personally think writers never retire. Um, so I'm now kind of in many ways looking on the outside into my group of friends that lead a different life than I do. So that to me has been the most recent challenge. Um, but I find that every morning I'm motivated. Sometimes I need more motivation than others, and sometimes some days I'm there and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And I have to give myself, I tell myself, I give myself an hour and a half. If after 90 minutes I am really struggling and then I'll walk away, it's not a good day. I have never had to walk away. By an hour and a half, I'm there, you know, hitting the keyboard. So it's just a matter of being patient with yourself. It's not inspiration. I think inspiration happens so few and far between that I think it's more the persistence, the discipline. I'm going to get this done and I'm going to hit whatever, 1,500 words a day, 2,000, 1,000, whatever goal you have in mind.
Hmm. Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Well, part of it actually came kind of recently because I was able in January to take the research trip, except now is for this research. So for this new book, um, and it's some of the people you encounter. So I'd have to go to museums and I'd look for some of the archives. And in Barcelona, like we have the Library of Congress here. So um, my whole goal was to have access to the Congress of Catalonia, where they had these old pamphlets. Some I knew existed, but I couldn't get them when was here. But I was told that it was residents, only residents. So I went and I told the person, the librarian, that I said, "Oh, I'm an American. But my parents are from Catalonia, and I'm researching my ancestry." And I told him what I had written and what I planned to write. And the man was so impressed because he says, the only people who know about the 1640 war is the true Catalans. So all of a sudden I was like, and I got my little library card.
Oh, wow.
So this is the only ones are the true Catalans.
So you're a true Catalan.
Oh, so I'm a true Catalan. My parents would be proud, I guess.
Oh, that's wonderful. That makes you feel kind of special.
Yeah, it does. And you kind of wish I had, or I wish I had asked my grandparents and my parents more questions. Now they have, I visited, they have two or three first cousins still alive. And, I was able to visit them. They're the younger ones. And I think how many of the family stories have been lost, and you feel I missed asking my mother what was it like to live through the Spanish Civil War? What was it like to have to leave, to go through all that hunger and all these things that even as an adult I never thought of asking, you know.
Yeah. I think I think that happens in most families
Yeah,
that, you keep wondering, what should I have asked?
which
You know,
right. And what gets lost.
what gets lost? All kinds of things definitely get lost. Yeah. Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you would recommend to other writers that you have helped that you might have helped you in your career that you would recommend?
Well, for me, I have found the that having a writing group um, has helped tremendously. And I call them my tribe because I do not come from a family of writers or creators in general. So it's a lifestyle that's very different from the rest of my family, my siblings, my parents, even my children. Um, but I have found that having this writing group, they understand, aside from giving advice, they understand. And I learned this only I decided, and it was about 2018, at the end of 2018, that I joined this group. And I wish I had done it much sooner for my other novels, because it would have saved me a lot of heartache in the revising and in the planning and in the structuring of the book. So that I'm a member of PEN, um, because I've lived in countries where there is no freedom of the press. There's no, things we take for granted here. So that's been, and there are two magazines that I get very excited about receiving: Poets and Writers and Writer's Digest. And I read those, every other month when they come for the poets. And then I became a member of of the Historical Novel Society, which I discovered uh, in the process of researching for Dulcinea. And I attended their 2021 virtual conference, and I thought it was fantastic. It was so much good, useful material. So I would highly suggest anybody who's doing historical novels to become a member. I am now attending in person their their they have it every other year. So I'm attending their conference in June, the second week in June, in San Antonio. So I'm really excited about that. I've seen their schedule, and just knowing what it was like virtually, I think I'm going to learn a lot. And they have great speakers. They really do.
I hadn't heard about that organization. That's
Yeah, I
wonderful.
had not heard of it, and but they're excellent. In fact, I told a friend of mine who's had he's on his fifth historical novel, and he had not heard, and he signed right up, and he's going. He's flying from Maryland, so to
That's
San
great.
Antonio.
Great. Okay, now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Wow, that is a hard one, because so much my of the syndicated column that I've written for years and years deals a lot with personal things. But I think few people know that I've always been um, very, very interested in investing, which is probably the other side of the brain. So I've always been very interested in finance. So I do a lot of research on finance. In a way, having um, that investment skill has been able to subsidize my writing is what I say, and I think few people know that. And
Hmm.
I always say, I think maybe that's why all my children, none chose to be writers, but they're all in some type of finance, business, um, field of some sort.
Ah, okay. So this is a really hard one. Um, what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
I think that as a journalist, if I had to ask myself a question, it would be more about how people how writers, and I think this is true of all writers who are parents, but I think it is particularly true of women writers. What happens to your career, your time, your ambition when you have children?
Mm.
And I always find that, like, my children's generation, I think, wow, they've got it so much easier because there's a more of an understanding and there are more open doors for for women. Um, and but I nevertheless believe that that there is a push and pull that happens as a parent and as a parent writer, that when you're with your children, you're thinking about whatever you want to write. When you're writing, you feel, maybe, am I spending too much time with my writing and
Mm.
ignoring my children? And um, that is, I think, something that is true and will always be true, no matter how much help you get from a spouse, no matter how much more aware and open society becomes.
Hmm. That's a very good question. Yeah. So, what is and are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for the things, hobbies, and things that you love?
Well, I'm a very early riser, much to the annoyance of my family or when I visit my children. So, one of the things I love to do if I'm not going to the gym, because I'm also kind of like a gym rat and goes, every day, but especially when I'm traveling or on the weekends, I love to just take off and walk and walk and walk and walk. And one of my favorite things to do is walk in the Everglades area in Florida, because that's such a unique setting. And we have a place, a small place on the water in the west coast of Florida, and we're right in a preserve. And you go out, and one of the most stunning things you encounter every morning is that sun rising. And even though you're facing west and you see all these birds coming out of the mangroves, and you see that light and those colors seeping into the sky. And to me, that is always a passion. I feel, in both good times and bad times, I think this is the beauty of our world around us. So
Hmm.
that's, one of my passions. I think my grandchildren, I just became the grandmother to grandchild number 9 in late April. So I leave and I immediately am already plotting the next time I can go visit my grandchildren, because it's, for them, you're abuela. You're not a writer, you're not a woman, you're not anything. You're just somebody they can climb on. It's that to me is priceless. It's really priceless. I think it's a not only priceless but a privilege to live long enough and healthy enough, to see this.
Hmm. Okay. So what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
Well, I have a room in my office where I have it. So you see some of the bookshelf. And I wish I could turn it around, but facing me behind my monitor, I have all kinds of artwork from my grandchildren, and pictures and things they've, written me, including, little poems. And um, I have the oldest grandchildren are almost 16, and when they went away to sleepaway camp, I have their little notes, and some of them, I'm looking at them right now, have little pictures of typewriters and quills and things like that. So that's something. And then I have little, um, I don't know if what you'd call them, mementos, because I have a lot of pictures of my grandchildren and my children, but little things of my childhood. So I have a little giraffe that belonged to my late sister, my middle sister, that I always wanted, but I didn't have it. It was hers, and I wanted it ever since I was a little kid. That her children gave to me. So it's little things like that. I have my um, Cuban passport of when I was 6 years old when I came to the U.S. Which I think, oh, well, look at this, just so, it's these little things that kind of remind me of where I've come from and to kind of center me. Uh, and if I have any doubts, realize, hey, you come from strong stock that have been through a lot of things, wars and civil wars and exile, and you have an easy life. You have a real easy life.
Wow. Now, when you're writing, do you prefer music or silence? And if it's music, what type of music?
I don't listen to music, and one of the hard things um, when I became a writer that worked only from home was missing the background noise of the newsroom, because there was always some kind of clatter. And when I began as a journalist, we still used typewriters. And the typewriters, you would copy and paste and you'd send it, and they had a system OCR that scanned it, and that's how it was. But even long after typewriters and where computers were introduced, there was always kind of this background din. So I had to kind of grow accustomed to the silence. But that's been fine for me, because a lot of times I'm talking to myself in my head as I write. So it's that's enough noise.
So you do you prefer the silence now?
I think I prefer the silence. We got because we're crazy, and despite all our friends said you're crazy, we got a puppy about 2 months ago, and her crate is in my office. And because our old dog, that's where she always spent the time. And I said, oh no, I want. And she'll make kind of funny noises, but most of the time now she follows my husband around because he's outside and she gets to run around outside. And she's not old like the old dog, but she'll make her own weird noises, and sometimes she's entertaining the way she sleeps. I'll turn to the side and she's like, she looks like a dead roach. So,
So does she hinder you when you're writing
well,
sometimes?
sometimes her bone will fall under her bed and she'll dig and dig and dig. So I have to like stop, lift her bed, bring it out, and give it, you know. She doesn't like it when I sit down to write about 5 in the morning, though. That she
Yeah, I
does
can
not
imagine.
like. She'll like go into a little corner, dig under her toys, all her little plush toys. So that's always very entertaining.
I can see that. I'm not sure if you could hear my cat in the background before.
Well, I had a cat that did what you we were talking about previously. So he was quite the handful.
So,
Quite
do
the
you have any
handful.
special food or drink that you like to have with you?
Well, I always, and I social media this out, and it's very funny because I sometimes think that some of my followers follow me only because of chocolate. So I am known for having this kind of chocolate addiction. So I always start my writing day, with my coffee, and I have two pieces of dark chocolate. So preferably Dove's. I have discovered dark chocolate at Aldi's, which I also like. But I have a drawer in our pantry that is just devoted to my purchases of chocolate. So that's my little, kind of little habit. I start and I sweeten my day just in case it heads downhill after that.
Okay. I just have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I always have to mention Annie's and saying that you'll be able to get Dulcinea at Annie's Bookstop of Worcester if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com, and we will be able to send you the books. And where else can people find your book?
Well, the book and my other books are available anywhere where books are sold. I always encourage whenever somebody asks me, and I do this myself, so I walk the talk, is to to really um, frequent indie bookstores because I think they're the lifeline of authors and of literary life in general. So if they don't have it in stock, you can always
Yep.
ask. You can find me if you Google me online with Facebook, um, the usual Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, which I've just started, and am getting pointers from my teenage grandchildren. Um, but also my website, which is www dot my name, annavecianasuarez.com. And I've got all kinds of information there.
Oh, okay, great. Well, you just answered my second question, which was how could we follow your work and share your awesomeness? So
Yeah.
you've just answered that. So that was all I had for you today, and so thank you
Well,
very much
thank you.
for joining me today, and good luck with your new book and Dulcinea, and we hope that we'll be seeing more from you.
Well, thank you, Selena. Thank you very much. Truly enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Thank you.